We're going to bring in NBC's justice correspondent Pete Williams and NBC's Julia Ainsley, who covers national security and justice. They've been poring over this indictment. Pete, let's just start with you. How does Roger Stone fit into this bigger picture?
Well, he's part of a chain, according to the special counsel's office. Now, Mueller has already said that WikiLeaks, the organization run by Julian Assange, was in touch with the Russian government. What the indictment says is that Roger Stone was trying to get in touch with WikiLeaks. Now, Stone has predicted publicly during the campaign that there would be damaging emails coming about the Clinton campaign, but he's always said that was just based on his own predictions, that he didn't have special inside knowledge. What the investigation says is that he was trying constantly to get WikiLeaks to get more damaging emails and release them. But it doesn't say that he directly talked to Julian Assange. All this was through an intermediary. The problem for him is that he lied repeatedly about his contacts. The special counsel says there are emails, there are conversations in which he's trying to get people to get WikiLeaks to release more material, trying to find out what they have, trying to egg them on. So the problem for him is, according to the special counsel, that he lied to the congressional investigators and that he tried to get others not to say what he was up to. So it doesn't directly accuse him of colluding with the Russians. It accuses him of being, in essence, in touch with people who were trying to get WikiLeaks to do more colluding with the Russians. That's how it's laid out.
It's complicated. We're reading it here as well. These are building blocks, and this is one block potentially that the special counsel is putting together. Julia, as I turn to you, the other piece of it is Roger Stone's connection to the Trump campaign. We know he's a longtime associate of Donald Trump. We know that he once worked for the campaign, but during this relevant time period in the indictment, he was not an employee of the Trump campaign, but the indictment suggests he was in touch with a senior official of the Trump campaign who is unnamed, someone who did, according to this indictment, ask about what WikiLeaks might have against Hillary Clinton. Do we know anything more about that nexus?
Right, Savannah. So that could give us a window into where Mueller goes next. Essentially, Julian Assange, in connection with Randy Credico, who worked with Roger Stone, all of these connections lead us then to the Trump campaign. We know a very senior Trump administration official was directed, not sure who he was directed by, to be in touch with Roger Stone, and that they texted him, "Well done," after a big release. What this does is it paints a picture of who Roger Stone was to the Trump campaign. He came off of their payrolls in August of 2015, but during this crucial time period, around the summer of 2016 into the fall, when these WikiLeaks dumps started to occur that released information, emails exchanged between the Democratic National Committee, Roger Stone was not a free agent who was just merely giving gifts to the Trump campaign. He was actually in touch with them, and they knew what was coming, and he was trying to preview what would come next. They wanted more information from Roger Stone, and it's clear he was not acting on his own, but he was in direct contact with very senior officials within the campaign.
All right, Julia Ainsley, our national security reporter, Pete Williams at the Justice Department. It's a big indictment, and we will see how these pieces all fit together in the coming days. Thank you very much.